call the member for Kew.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. And I too rise to speak on the Terrorism, Community Protection and Control of Weapons Amendment Bill 2024, the amendments made by the Legislative Council. Now, let's just focus on for a moment, Acting Speaker, that only 2 weeks ago were we in this chamber debating this legislation. And at that time, the opposition moved an amendment to make machetes a prohibited weapon because the government failed to do so. The government failed to move the very amendment that they have had to bring in now and that we are debating today. 2 weeks ago, those opposite were actually condemning the very thing that they are coming into this chamber today and saying the government has done such a wonderful job. We have listened to the community. But what changed? What changed over those 2 weeks? What changed over those 2 weeks other than the polls showed that this government is heading in one direction? And those sitting on this side of the chamber are very, very worried about holding on to their own seats. Acting Speaker, that is no way to govern this state. There is one job that this government, that any government in this country must put forward against anything else. And that is keeping the community safe, making sure that Victorians feel safe in their own homes, in their businesses, when they're taking their kids to school. But under this government, under the Allen government, under this Premier's leadership, Victorians do not feel safe, and they are not safe. A day does not go by where I do not hear from my community about another aggravated burglary in someone's home, a home invasion in the middle of the night, a machete in someone's hands as they approach the front door of their house. Under this government's watch, and let's be very, very clear, Acting Speaker, we were in this chamber in the last sitting week debating this piece of legislation. We put forward the amendment. In fact, the Coalition put forward the amendment and a private member's bill 477 days ago. We have made 4 attempts to make machetes a prohibited weapon in this state. We have made 4 attempts. And what do we know? Nearly 15,000 knives, swords, daggers, machetes were confiscated last year. That's 40 weapons a day last year. Yet 2 weeks ago, the government didn't see it as an imperative to actually make sure that machetes were declared a prohibited weapon. Acting Speaker, we have seen an absolute U-turn from the government over the past week when it comes to crime in this state. But for those of us that have been sitting here for 2.5 years listening to those opposite say there's no crime crisis, there's no crime crisis when it comes to the rising rates of youth crime, there's no issue with bail in this state. In fact, let's weaken bail laws, and we saw the debate yesterday around bail. Of course, a debate that was only allowed to last 2 hours in this place. 2 hours after the opposition received the bill, less than 24 hours, was it guillotined and voted on. But I did have a look back at what some of the members opposite have been saying about machetes, about what they have been saying about the Coalition's attempt to actually introduce and strengthen our bail laws, our machete laws in this state. And what I noted was, particularly from a number of members, and I turn to the member for Tarneit, who often speaks on private members' bills in this place, and he said, "I'm proud that this government, unlike those opposite, are not resorting to desperate, tough-on-crime politics, and we never ever will." I wonder if the member for Tarneit raised the issue of the bail bill being called the tough bail bill, after he being so concerned about using the language of tough-on-crime. He goes on to say, "Some may prefer that tough-on-crime approach for young children, but evidence shows that it does not work." So what has changed? What has changed in terms of the approach last week and the week before and for 2 years in this place that this government hasn't been concerned about taking actual tough-on-crime approach? What has changed? Politics has changed. The Premier is getting very, very worried about holding on to her position, and that is what has changed in this place. It has nothing to do with keeping the community safe. Absolutely nothing. Yet here we are today with another rush piece of legislation. I note the member for Albert Park yesterday said that it can't be both overdue and rushed. Well, it certainly can, because we've had 2 pieces of legislation in this place this week that are both of those. Overdue. Overdue. Because we have been calling for this for years. The crime statistics do not lie. We do not lie. We have the highest number of criminal incidents in Victoria since the crime statistics began. We have the highest rates of youth crime since 2009. That's a 15-year high. Yet those on this side of the House, every single day for the past 2.5 years, have stood up and said there is not an issue. In fact, what have they done? They have weakened the laws in this state. They have made it possible for repeat offenders to go out on bail time and time again and to terrorise families every night. That is what is happening in this state under this government's watch. The amendments that the government have brought in today are rushed. They are rushed because they have not, once again, tried to actually make sure these will have an impact here and now for the community. These amendments will not come into effect for 288 days.
Can you believe it?
288 days. So on the one hand, we have the Premier and the Police Minister come out last week, hold a series of press conferences saying, we've listened, we accept we are not on the right path, that we have made terrible mistakes that have put Victorians' lives at risk, cost Victorians their lives, because suddenly things have been raised on FM radio and, oh gosh, we better react.
FM has a petition.
So we saw the Premier and the Police Minister hold a series of press conferences, yet clearly the work behind the scenes had not been done, because we had to wait to the 11th hour, the 12th hour, to actually see the legislation produced, to make sure that we could actually analyse that legislation. And finally, when it does come in, what do we see? We see the fact that there is going to be 288 days before these pieces of legislation even has an effect. That's why the member for Brighton, on behalf of the Shadow Minister, has moved a series of amendments, because we are not going to stand by and allow this to happen, for this to continue in this state, to make people feel unsafe in their homes night after night because machetes are allowed to be sold and that people are allowed to hold machetes for days and weeks and months to come. That is unacceptable, and that is certainly not doing anything to strengthen the laws in this state. Last year, we saw 40 weapons a day seized. 40 weapons a day under this government. Yet, time and time again, we have seen those opposite vote against the very amendments that they are now bringing forward. 4 times over the course of this parliament has each and every member on the government side voted against making a machete a prohibited weapon.
Unbelievable.
What has changed? For those members to sit there and then lecture the opposition from their talking points, I do not know how they are able to formulate the words. Every single member on the government side has a lot to answer for voting against trying to make the machete a prohibited weapon 4 times over the past 2 years. This has meant that Victorians have been left safe. We have seen the shocking incidents in this state where machetes have been used to go into people's homes, hold them at knife point, hold small business owners at knife point while they rob their shops. It is appalling that has been allowed to occur time and time again. Yet when the government finally comes to the table and accepts, well, maybe there is a problem, but more importantly, we better react to the politics because we're sliding so quickly in the polls. But when they finally come to the table, they say, not right now though. We'll give it a little bit more time. We'll give it a few more weeks. We'll give it a few more months until the end of this year before we actually see these amendments take effect and that the sale of machetes in this state is no longer prohibited. This government has so much to answer for when it comes for their derelict duty for keeping this community safe. Not a day goes by where I don't hear from a member of my community saying they do not feel safe in their home. It should be the number one priority of any government to keep the community safe. But under the Premier, under the Allen Labor government, time and time again, those members have voted against the opportunity to keep Victorians safe. Victorians are paying the price for this weak government.
I call the member for Melton.